And I've always thought that why is an orchestra, the activity of making orchestral music, why is that so well received and absorbed and integrated in cultures around the world? I mean, in Tokyo, there are probably more orchestras than any other city on
Yes.
earth. I think it's because the the musicians themselves and the public, and they understand that it's an idealized social paradigm. So there's a structure. You have a conductor and concertmaster and principal players, and then the section players. The protocols are observed from the time that they tune the orchestra to the time that you give the downbeat. Everybody has the same material, but different parts. We begin, we have cadences, we have ups and downs, and we all arrive in harmony. So that's kind of a paradigm that almost anybody could appreciate, wanting for the structure of their society to work as efficiently and harmoniously as an orchestra.
Hi, David.
It's nice to meet you face to face.
Yes, it's so lovely to meet you here on Zoom. David, where are you based at the moment?
In Florida, in St. Petersburg, Florida.
Okay.
I
But
just moved back.
are you there from Florida originally?
No, I'm originally from New York, from Buffalo, New York.
Mm.
But lots of moving around the world. And my wife and I, about 11 years ago, decided to move back to the United States. And so we just picked this area because it's very nice.
Lovely weather.
St. Petersburg.
Oh, okay.
St. Petersburg, Tampa.
Okay, yeah. But I mean, it's lovely weather all year round there.
Well, there are a few hurricanes once in a while, but other than that,
Okay.
it's very nice. And you're in Vienna.
I'm in Vienna, yes. But David, I've read about all your wonderful work, all the awards you've been receiving, and yes, you've been all over all the continents that you've worked and conducted. Was this initially what you hoped to do? Was this the dream to go all over the world?
Yes, in part, but my initial plan when I finished my studies and when I finished as assistant conductor in Leipzig, my initial plan was to be based in Berlin and to be mostly in that part of the world. But that was 1990, I think. So it was the worst possible moment to try to establish oneself in Berlin because there were so many people from Eastern Europe who had moved into Berlin. And without exaggerating, I looked for an apartment for 6 months and couldn't find one. And but I did finally find an apartment, and I paid my Abstand. And then I thought I would go to London for a break. And when I came back, the landlord was nowhere to be found, and he ran off with my Abstand.
Oh,
So
no.
and they told me he did this with, I don't know, maybe 20 other people. So he has a nice retirement fund. And so I decided to make a change of plans. So I moved to Chicago, and that's where I really got things started. And because the go ahead.
No, as a young conductor from America, was Europe the place where you felt you had to go?
Yes, for a variety of reasons. First of all, I wanted to be with an historic orchestral institution as an assistant conductor, and what could be better than the oldest public orchestra in the world, the Gewandhaus. And my violin teacher had introduced me to Kurt Masur. They had recorded together quite a bit. And so Kurt Masur auditioned me and invited me to go to Leipzig. And of course, it was still, at that time, the Deutsche Demokratische Republik, which for a North American seem to be a very strange choice. My parents were very concerned, of course.
Really?
But I think it was just the greatest thing. And I had the objective of how can an American orchestra, whether it's North America or South America, or be as relevant in a community culturally, artistically, as the Gewandhaus or the Vienna Philharmonic or the Berlin Philharmonic is to their respective communities. So that was kind of a cultural and sociological interest and priority for me.
Yeah, because in America you do it a bit different. I mean, you have to have sponsors for your orchestras, and you're not it's not like in Europe where you are at a base. Am I right? So that's what I understood from, yeah. And it's sometimes also musicians that have another career, and that they play sort of on the side in an orchestra.
Well, it depends. If it's a major orchestra, and there are many, they're substantive full-time positions, and the musicians are just dedicated to the orchestra. But you're, of course, right that they're private institutions which depend on private sector sponsorships, foundations, and whatnot. So the economic structure is very different. And as a result, I would say that the programming is very often influenced by simply ticket sales, ticket revenues, which is positive in some ways and negative in a variety of other ways. I'll give you an example. There's a strong tendency to prioritize, in the context of a year's programming, pops concerts and rock symphonic concerts and things which, depending on the group or the music, can be pretty trivial. And the comparison I often make is that you can't survive just on cupcakes or donuts. You need to have protein and fiber, and and it depends what part of the world. I worked a lot in Eastern Europe, Southern Europe, and I very much love these environments. But I also worked more than anything in Latin America, and there it depends where you are. Some of the orchestras are sponsored entirely by the state, which has the advantage of being able to, hopefully, program substantive concert seasons with a structure and with a great variety of music. However, the disadvantage in Latin America sometimes, not always, is that you might receive on Monday a call from the Ministry of Culture, and they want you to play for the Ministry of Sports in an athletic arena and some kind of a superficial program. So there are advantages and disadvantages to all of these models.
Yeah, and I've also spoken to conductors, and we talk about this thing where people want to hear the same things over and over again, like I would say the popular classical music, but then it's really working into these programs unknown works that people haven't heard before. But I assume that when you are working with sponsors and it's money and it's ticket sales, you want to give the audience what they want.
I think there is a healthy balance to be struck. And the conductor in designing a program needs to think very, it has to be somewhat creative or ingenious about strategically programming works which have perhaps not been heard. For example, I'll give you a recent example. We had a program in Quito, and Paul Hindemith's Matis de Mahler, which is one of the great symphonies of the 20th century, had never been performed in Ecuador ever. And it's a magnificent work, and it's a work which enriches the musicians tremendously. It's a very rewarding work artistically. That symphony in Europe would probably be the work that you might close a program with because it's tremendous and impactful. But I decided to program it on the first part of the program. And on the second part, we had the Grieg Piano Concerto, which everybody knows and everybody loves. So it was a very healthy balance in the program. So I do often conduct contemporary music or works from the repertoire, which are not so often played. But it's a question of placing them carefully in the context of that program and over the course of the entire season.
And now, what about new music? Like new composers or living composers?
Well, it's kind of the same story. You have to believe in the composer. You have to believe in that composer's work first of all, and you have to think again contextually. So another example, I had programmed for this year a work by a contemporary composer from New York, David Winkler, who wrote his Fifth Symphony, which is for orchestra and organ. But of course, that would be completely new, but it would have been a premiere. But for the second half, the Sanson Organ Symphony, which is, of course, a very romantic language, which is easy to digest, and it's a very powerful work. And most listeners know it, and even if they don't, it's almost impossible to miss the point in the expression.
But sorry? Mm-hmm.
Oh, I was just going to add that for years now, I think 15 years, I've been conducting an orchestra in Chile, which has an emphasis on contemporary music.
Oh, okay. Mm. But I've also read that you commission a lot of work.
I have, in different contexts. Mm. Some have been in Latin America, creating, let's say, a fusion between their folkloric rhythms and idioms, but with an orchestral palette. And then in other cases, just brand new works by contemporary composers like David Winkler or like Edward Green, who are two important North American composers. And I enjoy these collaborations very much.
So do you first see what the composer does and then commission specifically, or do you give guidelines? Do you have a program in mind when you do the commissions?
It's a great question. When we have, for example, a composition competition, then I define very specific guidelines. For example, it should be a poem for orchestra with the following instrumental elements: two oboes, two flutes, whatever, and it should be no more than 10 or 12 minutes maximum, and it might be based on a certain thematic material. If I'm working with a composer for just a commission coming from me, initiated by me, it's because I find the composer's output to be so interesting that I would like the composer to be able to just let his imagination fly and take a life of its own.
That's amazing. But do you get composers that, because of the fact that you do these commissions, do you have composers that approach you with their work?
Yes, lots and lots. And it's really not always possible. And also you have to find the right place to present their work. There's a composer, Iranian North American composer Reza Vali, excellent composer, just marvelous. And he wanted for us with the Orlando Symphony to record two of his symphonic poems. And I wanted to do this very much, but economically it just was not possible between his resources, his sponsors' resources, and the cost of the orchestra. So sometimes these initiatives are just frustrated by very practical, very down to earth reasons.
It's this is always so sad for me, because we don't realize that it's also a business, and of course you as a conductor, you also have to take that into consideration.
Yes, absolutely. You try to have your feet on the ground and your head in the sky, and sometimes never the twain shall meet.
Do you have a business mind? Are you a businessman?
Theoretically, I've done well in that sense. I've raised lots of resources for the different orchestras I've conducted. So I'm able to, I think it's a question of creating trust with a potential sponsor, and that you have a track record. With the orchestra in Ecuador, that was very difficult, and one of the reasons I decided to resign was because there were so many sponsorship opportunities, but the government structure made it almost impossible to utilize the resources I was able to raise, because of the mechanics of the government, or because of jealousies or political pressures from one side or the other. But going back to let's say, the more business part of it, I keep myself very busy, so I guess I do okay, and I have a business manager, an executive assistant who follows my guidance about which way I want to go, where I think there's an interesting marketplace that might be receptive to what it is I do. So, yeah, it's a big part of it in conducting.
But you've also played or you also conducted in places where you don't. It's a bit unusual, and it's like Baghdad and Iraq. And what drove you there? What attracted you to go there?
Well, the opportunity came up through a group of artists that I'd been working with for a number of years, and this just goes back more than 15 years, I think. And I was very curious. My experience is that people are wonderful and receptive everywhere. Doesn't matter where. And I enjoy that contact with people with whom I've had no cultural personal experience. And it's always confirmed that sense of human interaction and sensitivity, and I love the intercultural communication. It was very funny. I have an anecdote for you, because you mentioned Iraq. While we were there, we were rehearsing and performing in the Ministry of Culture's brand new compound. And there were sharpshooters all around, and we had to be taken to the rehearsal site with a tank in front of us. But anyway, when we arrived there, it was a lovely environment. Everybody was wonderful. But it was an orchestra made up of people from all of the cultures around Iraq. So mainly you had Arabs and you had Kurds. And I'm a Jew. I don't practice, but it's my background. So I thought, well, this dynamic should be very interesting. It's not that I said anything, but everybody knew. Anyway, the point is that I had been mostly used to rehearsing in Spanish. And I had an English, Arabic, English, Kurdish translator for me. And frequently the lights would go out during the rehearsals. And it was very frustrating. And so we were rehearsing, and once again the lights went out. And so I just decided I would continue to gain time by making indications to the orchestra about this detail or this detail, and then it would be translated. Well, it had happened so many times that I just kind of lost it. And so I started giving my indications in Spanish, but the translator didn't speak Spanish. She only spoke English. So when the lights came back on, everybody looked up. What in the heck is he saying?
Well, everybody says that music is a universal language. So probably, yeah, the moment people start playing, then it's equal. Then there's no other language anymore.
I think, it may be universal when somebody's just listening.
Yeah.
But if you're a musician, it's not quite as universal. In fact, my first class at the university was Music History 101. And it was basically music of all parts of the world. The professor was William Mall. And he said, music is not universal. So now at this point in my life, I've had enough experiences where I understood the point. So, for example, we could go to a kabuki theater and we could enjoy it very much, but without the precision that only somebody from that culture would understand.
Oh, I see.
And in Iraq, we had a similar experience. We had a work for string orchestra. For a North American or European, it would not be complicated at all. But there were certain rhythms that just were not culturally native. They weren't culturally indigenous. And it was a real challenge, challenge.
That's very interesting, but it makes sense that when you talk about that rhythm.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm. So how do you solve something like that?
Well, in that case, you have to behave like a teacher, and you have to work in detail and work out all of the rhythms. But even having said that, if you program a work by, let's say, well, for example, I did the Leonard Bernstein symphonic dances from West Side Story with a fabulous orchestra in Moscow. But there was one moment that they didn't know the work and they didn't know how everything fit together. And the concertmaster asked me, would I mind if we did this slowly so that everybody could hear what was going on? And once they heard that, then they got it.
Okay.
And then if you have, let's say, the work by Gershwin, I don't know, the Concerto in F, which is a big, complex work, but it's very jazzy, of course. Sometimes the musicians don't quite, they don't get the natural schwung, the swing to it. So that's another challenge. But it's always fun.
Yeah, but now how the audiences, how do they then receive it in these different cultures?
In the case of the works I've mentioned, it's always a huge reception. I think in part because it's in their ear,
yeah,
but it's not constantly played. So they're very receptive, especially with Bernstein and with Gershwin, especially with those two. And also with Ginastera, always. Marquez. Well, there's so many wonderful composers of the 20th century from the Americas, and the music is infectious and usually very upbeat and very richly orchestrated, rhythmically dynamic.
But when you go to all these countries, do you how much do you adapt then to that? What they would want, what these audiences would enjoy when you do your programming?
Well, it depends on the context. But let's say, for example, it's part of a subscription series. So you already have a public that has some idea of what an orchestra is about and what the experience is like. And and the activity with the musicians is universal. The orchestra was something that evolved in Central Europe from beginning in the 17th century, really. And so there are customs and there are protocols. So pretty much every orchestra in the world abides by those general protocols and the structure. There's a hierarchy. And I've always thought that why is an orchestra, the activity of making orchestral music, why is that so well received and absorbed and integrated in cultures around the world? I mean, in Tokyo, there are probably more orchestras than any other city on earth.
Mm.
I think it's because the musicians themselves and the public, they understand that it's an idealized social paradigm. So there's a structure of a conductor and concertmaster and principal players, and then the section players. The protocols are observed from the time that they tune the orchestra to the time that you give the downbeat. Everybody has the same material, but different parts. We begin, we have cadences, we have ups and downs, and we all arrive in harmony. So that's kind of a paradigm that almost anybody could appreciate, wanting for the structure of their society to work as efficiently and harmoniously as an orchestra.
Amazing. Yeah, I haven't thought of that, but that's true. Could it be like that?
Well, it should be.
Yeah. But you started off playing the violin.
I did.
So at what age did you start?
I was 6, and my grandfather had a violin that he played when he was a child, and he had it carefully stored in his closet. And he would tempt me every time I would stay with him and my grandmother. One day you'll play this. From the time I was 2 or 3,
Really?
and so at 6 I started with that violin, which was much too big for me because it was a full-size violin.
Oh, okay.
With children, you usually start with something smaller. And then I went on to do my undergraduate studies in violin performance and composition. And I studied violin at the university with a renowned violinist, Ruggero Ricci, who passed away several years ago. But I always wanted to conduct.
Really? But did you still then play on this violin, this old violin of your
No,
grandfather?
no. My grandmother bought me a much better violin.
Oh, okay. But they must have been very proud of you then.
I fought with my father like hell to continue in music, but he was happy later in his life.
Okay.
But my mother was always very supportive.
So did you know from a young age that you wanted to be a musician, or that you wanted to be a conductor, you said?
Yes. I started conducting in my high school. And so I was 15, I think, 15, 16. And as an undergraduate, you're never permitted to major in conducting. That's a graduate program. But I had the good fortune of going to a really fine music school, and it was the head of conducting was one of the best known in the world. He's now passed away, Gustav Meyer, who was one of Bernstein's assistants. So he took me under his wing and allowed me to take the classes, attend the conducting seminar without credit, but he allowed me to participate. So I was able to move ahead at a younger age than most.
Amazing. But what was it about conducting that you loved so much?
I had a subscription. My parents had purchased a subscription for me for every weekend at the Philharmonic in Buffalo, very fine orchestra. And I think I was swept away with the sonic experience and the diversity of colors, and of course the repertoire and that social paradigm also that I mentioned. So I was just overwhelmed. I couldn't do anything else.
Really. Now, this for me is also amazing if I think how an orchestra, how a conductor can bring all these different sounds together into one sound. This has always been fascinating to me.
Well, the conductor depends on his colleagues and his own or her own, let's say, management of complex human environment. So there's a psychological element, and we depend on the protocols, and we depend on being good professionals and good humor.
But now, David, you've also represented the USA as a cultural ambassador. What does that entail?
Well, there are different programs within the United States State Department, all kinds of diplomacy, one of which is cultural diplomacy. And you can be invited by an organization, an orchestra in my case. And if they should approach the embassy, or if I should approach the embassy, or the State Department, or the Fulbright program, there are many programs, then you are effectively doing what is it called? Citizen diplomacy or cultural diplomacy without being an official diplomat. But at one point, I was a Fulbright senior scholar. So that's part of a State Department program to promote positive relations between nations. I forget the exact phrase, but it's something like that.
But you've also done work in, is it Bolivia?
I worked in Bolivia for a long time, for 14 years as music director. And the initial, I think, 3 years of my position, I was partly, or the position was partly underwritten by the Fulbright program. And the project was, and that was my first position as a music director, was to develop the organization, because when I arrived, it was a very humble orchestra. I think there were 45 musicians, two people on staff who would do all kinds of tasks. And the idea was to develop the organization structurally, professionally, economically. And so we worked very hard. I remember at the beginning of the tenure, from morning until midnight, putting the organization in order, creating a small administrative team, growing the orchestral mass, which started at about 45. And when I left, it was about 75 musicians. We needed infrastructure. So it was a mission for me to find a home for the orchestra, because they had been rehearsing here and performing there. So we secured an historic landmark building, and we secured the funds to completely reconfigure the building and make it into a good sounding concert hall. And it was only for the orchestra, so the orchestra would be able to rehearse on the same stage that they performed. So that was, you could call it, institution building. So that was part of the Fulbright project.
And did you enjoy this challenge? Because it seemed like a bit of a challenge.
Well, it was the right thing, the right time.
Oh, okay.
I took the position because at that time when I started, I was living in Chicago, and I had two offers. I was conducting a lot in Latin America, but just as a guest conductor. And I had a chamber orchestra that had very few concerts in Chicago, which was underwritten by the Chicago Department of Cultural Affairs. But then I had two more substantive offers. One was with a regional orchestra in Wisconsin, played very well, but very few programs per year. And the other one was the National Symphony of Bolivia, which was kind of, let's say, remote. And my plan was to go back and forth between Chicago and La Paz, Bolivia. In any case, I called Kurt Mazur and I explained to him that I have these two possibilities. Which one would you take? And he said, go to Bolivia.
Really?
And his point was that it's the National Symphony. Your success will depend on what you build. And so I went and stayed there for much longer than I anticipated.
But amazing the work that you've done there.
Oh, I don't know. I loved pretty much every minute of it. And when you can see and when the progress is palatable, it's very rewarding. And maybe the best thing of it all is that I met my wife there. So.
Oh, wow. Oh, I love that.
But she's not from Bolivia.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I was doing a tour in Central Asia. And when I arrived in Turkmenistan, I thought, my God, the economy here is much worse than in Bolivia. But they're Soviet-trained musicians. They're probably some people who might be interested. So I announced immediately auditions for on Monday that I would hold auditions on Wednesday. And I had, I think, 12 people who auditioned, and I hired a new concertmaster, very talented violinist. And then he moved to Bolivia, and his wife and their one-year-old son moved to Bolivia 1 year later. Well, he was an excellent violinist, but he was very problematic.
Okay.
All kinds of problems of that nature. Yeah. The two of them separated. And about 3 years later, after their separation, I needed a Russian Spanish translator because I was going to hire somebody. And so my executive assistant played the matchmaker and got us together. And I think my assistant was worried that I didn't have a personal life. And so anyway, we got together and we've been married for a number of years.
Amazing. Oh, I love a love story. This is an amazing story. Well, the music brought you together then.
I guess so. I never wanted to marry a musician, but it's worked out well.
Amazing.
She's also a yoga instructor.
Oh, okay. And do you do yoga?
No, because I don't want my wife to order me around. So.
Yeah, that's true. My daughter also is a yoga instructor, but I don't do yoga. Yeah. No, not for the same reason you do, that I don't want to order me around. But hey, actually, this is a good excuse that I can use. But David, I want to ask you now: do people ask you if you are family of the famous composer Handel?
They always ask, of course, and my response is, "Why not?"
Yeah, it could be.
But it's possible because my Handel family is from the same region.
I see. Okay.
So when I say the same region, I mean a very small region. And then the family name it's not that common. No. And Handel, it's either spelled with H-A-E or H-A with umlaut. Yeah. Or H-A. And our family has all of those versions. So it's possible. I'm not certain. But I do know that in our family is Heinrich Heine,
Oh, I see. Okay.
but
Now,
of course he's not a musician.
I'm sure they must be, because it's not a very common surname.
No,
Mm.
and there are theories. I don't know if they're theories, or I don't know if it's been historically proven yet. But that kind of family name very often equated with one or another trade, and the variants. There's the theory that Handel was Jewish, so that would even reduce further the pool. But I don't know.
But I would like to think that I'm doing an interview with the family, a family of of Handel. So let's say that it's true.
Okay.
Yeah.
While I was living in Quito, I was living in a building by the company was called Schubert. So my
Oh,
building was Schubert, Handel
yeah.
living in Schubert's
And Schubert
building,
building it.
and the street was Austria.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. Oh, this is perfect then. Yeah. But David, tell me now, you've accomplished so much, you've done so much already. What is the wish still for you for the future?
But there's lots on the docket. I have a very large project, recording project with the Royal Philharmonic of London. That's a big project and it's still in the works, but it's to record the complete symphonic, operatic, and choral symphonic works of Alberto Ginastera, the great Argentinian composer. That's one project. And then with our mutual friend Ruben Chiliberti,
Yes.
we have a program which we just did in Quito, which was a wonderful experience and a huge success of works by Piazzolla, Gardel, and others of the period in new arrangements um, by Stefano Bartolucci, who's an Italian arranger, pianist, conductor, very, very gifted arranger. And in that program, Ruben, he sings and he has a fantastic voice and he's extremely expressive, but he engages with the public in a way that's unique. But he also dances on the program, anywhere from balletic to tap, and then he plays the piano as well with the orchestra.
Amazing.
So it's a very dynamic, fun program. But some of the music it's not just beautiful or fun, but Renascerò by Piazzolla is a very dramatic, moving work, or La Ballada de un Loco, which is another marvelous work. So it's a very substantive program with a contemporary language, of course, but it's also a spectacle.
Well, I think Ruben is such a great artist. Really, I've done an interview with him as well, and such a great performer. And no, I just absolutely adore him.
As
I
do
would
I.
love to see. Yeah, I would love to see this program.
Well, there should be some videos going up online pretty soon. Ruben is in charge of that, and then we hope to tour with this with the Orlando Symphony Orchestra, initially throughout Florida, and then he and I present the program in different parts of the world. It's very attractive and an unusual program.
What a wonderful idea to do a tour to Vienna.
We'd love to.
Mm,
We'd love to.
I think let's put it out there.
Then
That would be great.
Yeah, I think it would be a big success. And of course, Vienna is a city of music. So,
Absolutely. I think something like that would be amazing. But David, this was so lovely talking to you. I'm so glad that Ruben introduced us and or got us into contact. You've done amazing work and also continue to do amazing work. So it was really a privilege to talk to you.
well, thank you very much for the invitation. You're very kind, and it's been a pleasure, and hopefully we'll be in touch again.
Yes, definitely. And when you come to Vienna, please let me know.
Of course. Of course.
Have a lovely afternoon and
Likewise.
hope to see you soon.
Okay. Tschüss.
Thank you. Cheers.